I'm one of the founders of an organization called the Young Storytellers Program. And the Young Storytellers Program is a nonprofit that is dedicated to promoting literacy through the art of storytelling. So I've always had a desire to really make a difference, right? So when I was younger, I would donate part of my allowances to organizations such as PETA or Greenpeace, and I would help our handicapped neighbor get her groceries, and later on in life, I would volunteer and go visit with the elderly in my community, help them with their errands, and spend time with them and so forth. And while all of this made me feel really good, my desire to really make a difference was never really fulfilled. It was never really fulfilled. And part of the problem was that my desire to make a difference was this opaque and very, very big concept that was very hard for me to grasp. And I actually think this is true for our desires in general. I think that they can have a tendency to be very ambiguous, and they can have a tendency to really be hard to grasp, and subsequently, they can be really hard to fulfill, right? So for me, the big breakthrough came when I actually approached my desire to make a difference from a different angle. So we're going to go back a little bit. We're going to go back to, we're not going to go that way. We're going to go back to the fall of 1996. So I had just arrived in Los Angeles from my native Denmark a few months earlier, and I arrived here to go to film school. And it was here at school that I developed a friendship with one of the screenwriting teachers at school. And in between one of our many conversations about movies, we also began talking about public elementary schools in Los Angeles. And I remember that she explained to me that due to budget cuts, the arts programs in the public elementary schools in Los Angeles, in LAUSD, had been cut. And I sort of looked at her, sort of discombobulated. And I said to her, well, what happens if you're a kid who maybe isn't quite adept at math or science or social science, for that matter? And she just looked at me. She says, therein lies the problem, right? And there was simply no way for these public elementary school children to express themselves creatively. And then I began thinking about the kind of things that some of these children go through. And I'm sorry, I'm going to get moved. And I began thinking about what life must be like for someone who doesn't fit inside the box. And I began thinking about what it feels like if you're unable to express yourself creatively. And at that moment, I knew I had to do something, right? At that moment, I couldn't be in this city and not do something about it. And something really interesting happened. My desire to make a difference became a clearly defined problem, right? So my desire to make a difference became a clearly defined problem. And the moment it went from being a desire to being a clearly defined problem, it went from being a want, like I want to make a difference, to being a need. I had to do something. And I began, because I looked at it as a problem, I began looking for a solution, right? So the problem I defined was, how do I help the public elementary school children of Los Angeles become fully self-expressed? That was the problem. All right, here's the wrinkle. I had no idea what the solution was going to be, right? I had no idea what the solution was going to be. But I knew one thing. I knew that if I was to solve this problem, something had to change, right? There had to be some form of a change. And this brings me back to our desires in general, because I do think that if we really want to fulfill our desires, something has to change. We have to initiate what I like to call some form of a change agent. We have to find something, right? Something that can act as a catalyst, right? And help us solve whatever problem it is that our desire represents. So what I did is I traveled back even further in time to look for answers. And what I did is, so if I knew that the problem was about helping the children, the public elementary school children of LA, become fully self-expressed, what I did is I traveled back in time to a time when I myself felt that I was unable to express myself fully. That's what I did. So I began to travel back in time. I began looking for what I call a known element, something, right? So a time when that was the case, and someone or something changed that paradigm. Someone or something changed that paradigm. So in this case, I traveled back to the early 1980s in Copenhagen, Denmark. And I was around 8 years at the time. And my parents were going through a divorce. And my dad was moving out, and he was moving to an area of the city that I was completely unfamiliar with. And, my life was falling apart around me. And I really wanted to talk to my parents about what was going on, but they were dealing with so much stuff that I didn't want to burden with whatever I was feeling, right? So as a consequence, what started happening is, I felt like a piece of lint in a dryer. I felt utterly alone, and I really had nowhere to turn. Unfortunately, this meant that this sort of frustration began showing up at school. So I began becoming unfocused. I began losing my interest in learning. My grades began slipping. But the worst thing was that I started taking my frustration out of my fellow students. And things were just headed in a bad direction. Until someone decided to do something about it. Excuse me. My Danish teacher at the time saw that something was going on, and she decided to pull me aside. So when the other kids were told to write book reports, she said, I want you to write stories about whatever you want. And I was like, whatever? She goes, you can write about anything. So I started writing stories, by the way, thinly veiled stories, about what I was experiencing, the sense of fear, the sense of loss, the sense of confusion, how I almost got jumped by the local gangs as I was walking to my dad's apartment. All of these stories came out. And little by little, I rediscovered my passion for learning. And little by little, my grades began improving. And things worked out pretty well. So as I was standing here in Los Angeles in 1996, and these emotions, as they do now, washed over me, I began thinking about what my life would have looked like if this one person hadn't taken an interest in me, and what my life would have looked like if I hadn't found a space to express myself creatively, right? My life would have been totally different. And then I began thinking about the public school children of LA, and the fact that out of the 6 million students in the California school system, approximately 25% of them are unable to perform basic reading skills. And I began thinking about the fact that part of how we project how many prison beds are needed in the future is based on how well current elementary school children perform on reading tests, right? And I thought about, what if we could just do something to change that? What if we could take the experience that I went through? What if we could replicate that, right? What if there was a way to take an adult and put them with a child in a mentor relationship and help them tell stories about whatever they want? And what if there was a way for these kids to write these stories? And what if there was a way to get professional actors to take these stories and perform them in front of their peers, in front of their friends, in front of their families, to show them these stories of hope and inspiration and laughter? What if we could do that? And just like that, the Young Storytellers was born. Just like that, it was born. Now, I want to be totally honest with you. I really didn't think that I was going to start a nonprofit that at this point in time currently has every year over 700 mentors working with 700 kids all around the city of LA. And I really didn't know, I couldn't imagine that over 700 professional actors put on over 700 performances every year for over 6,000 audiences every year. And I really never thought that I would play a role in having made a difference for over 5,000 kids to this date. I didn't know. And I really didn't know that I would be up here talking to you about it. I could never have imagined it. But using this sort of in hindsight, fairly simple approach, I was able to take a desire that was really nebulous and big in concept and translate it into something that really has turned into something which has fulfilled my desires way beyond my wildest expectations. And my utter hope is that I can inspire you and do the same. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.